Hello and welcome to Cleveland Classic Cinema. Tonight's movie is 1948's He Walked by Night, directed by Alfred L. Werker. He Walked by Night is based very loosely on a true story. Irwin Walker had been a brilliant student at the California Institute of Technology, a radio dispatcher for the police in Glendale, his hometown, and a lieutenant in charge of a radar unit on Okinawa during World War II. He came back from the war disturbed by nightmares, convinced that he had been responsible for the death of a buddy during a surprise attack. While still in the Army, he stole 6 submachine guns and a dozen pistols from an Army warehouse in Los Angeles and went on a series of holdups and robberies to finance the building of a death ray machine that would, he claimed, bring about an end to war. He shot his way out of 2 police traps and killed 3 officers, boasting about it to his girlfriend. She told the priest about this during confession, and the Padre alerted police. He was sleeping when they raided his apartment, and when he dove for a machine gun, was shot twice, had the butt of a gun busted over his head, and had a confession forced out of him as he lay near death on the floor. He was convicted and sentenced to death. 36 hours from his scheduled execution, a guard discovered him lying in his cell with a manila envelope over his head, and the cord from a pair of headphones wrapped around his neck. Interviewed by psychiatrists, he was pronounced insane due to fear of his impending death. He was committed to a mental hospital in Talmadge. He was declared fit for execution in 1959, but his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment since the governor felt that putting him on death row would cause a relapse in his mental illness. Granted a new trial in 1971, the judge ruled that his confession was coerced and he was set free. He changed his name, took a job as a chemist, got married, and faded into the background. Okay, fair enough. The confession was, after all, coerced, and even though he committed the crimes he confessed to, it is against the law to force a confession out of a suspect. He served 25 years of a life sentence and today leads a productive life. I believe in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. They are, after all, the bedrock this country was built on. But there are times when I feel the crimes committed are so heinous that, crazy or not, the perpetrators deserve to be punished in the toughest possible manner. See, I don't hold with people who are against the death penalty. I have a scholarly interest in crime, and as a result, I have a lot of books about criminals, many of which are about serial killers. Sometimes the stories I read make me sick. And when I read about someone like Albert Fish, who molested more than 1,000 children and was arrested and convicted for killing and eating 9-year-old Gracie Budd, or Dennis Nilsen, who murdered 14 of his homosexual lovers and kept their dead bodies in his apartment so he'd have someone to come home to at night. Of course, when they started to get ripe, he'd cut them up and flush their remains down the toilet, eventually doing this so often that he ended up clogging the sewer system coming from the house. I look at what these animals did and I think, you know, they're getting off way too easy. Take Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, for example. These sick pigs met in prison, and when they were released, they bought a used cargo van, dubbed it Murder Mac, and then abducted, raped, and murdered 6 girls ranging in age from 13 to 18 while recording their screams on tape. Norris, showing the bravado that eventually infects all serial killers, bragged of his crimes to a friend who in turn went to the police. He then cut a deal with the authorities and ratted out Bittaker, who got the death sentence, while Norris ended up getting sentenced to 45 years to life and will be eligible for parole in 2010. Now, leaving aside the fact that the authorities allowed one of these murdering bastards to plea bargain himself down to life, the fact that Bittaker, once he eventually walks the Green Mile, will be put to death by lethal injection. If I had my way, the punishment for both of these monsters would fit the crimes they committed, and they would be put to death in the slowest, most painful way possible. See, it's not a question as to whether or not these two are guilty. On the tape recording of one of their murders, you can hear Norris chanting, keep it up, girl, scream until I say stop." Like it or not, there are some people who cannot be rehabilitated. Who's to say Norris won't meet another Bittaker while he's in prison? What if the unthinkable happens and he's paroled? It must be incredibly frustrating for the policemen who work these cases to see things like this happen. I've never heard the tapes Norris and Bittaker made, nor do I ever wish to. But I can imagine how horrifying and heart-wrenching it must have been for the detectives on this case to hear them, and then look across the table into the smirking faces of these animals who committed these horrendous crimes, knowing that they'd never suffer anywhere near as horribly as their victims. I seem to have strayed somewhat from my original point, and I'm sorry about that. I sometimes forget that this show isn't a forum for airing my personal feelings, it's about movies. However, on the upside, at least this time, I was at the very least on subject. Richard Basehart was born on August 31st, 1914 in Zanesville, Ohio. He acted in 76 movies throughout his career, starting with 1947's Repeat Performance. He came into his own as an actor with his performance in He Walked by Night, also appearing as Ishmael in John Huston's 1956 film Moby Dick. He also appeared in more than 39 television shows and is probably best remembered, by baby boomers anyway, for his role as Admiral Harriman Nelson in Irwin Allen's Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Others may remember him as the object of Gypsy's obsession on Mystery Science Theater 3000. He had an absolutely magnificent baritone voice and read the poem during the closing of the 1984 Olympic Games in Los Angeles. He suffered a series of strokes soon after and died on September 17th, 1984 in Los Angeles, California. Scott Brady, who appears in this film as Sergeant Marty Brennan, was born Gerard Kenneth Tierney on September 13, 1924 in Brooklyn, New York. He appeared in 78 movies and 94 television shows in his career, his first film being 1948's Cannon City. He was bitten by the acting bug after a stint in the Navy during World War II and began taking classes, eventually entering films and appearing in the 1955 movie The Hoodlum with his brother Lawrence Tierney, who some of our viewers may recognize as Big Joe Cabot from Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs. He was offered the role of Archie Bunker in All in the Family but turned it down, later making a guest appearance on the show. His last film appearance was as Sheriff Frank in Joe Dante's 1984 hit Gremlins. He died of emphysema on April 16, 1985 in Los Angeles, California. Whit Bissell was born on October 25, 1909 in New York City, New York. He should be a familiar face to fans of the 50s horror movies, having played Dr. Alfred Brandon in 1957's I Was a Teenage Werewolf, and Professor Frankenstein in I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, also in 1957. In the latter movie, he uttered what was, in my opinion at least, his most memorable line. "Speak. I know you have a civil tongue in your head because I sewed it in there myself." He appeared in over 200 movies and a ton of TV shows, usually playing a doctor or a scientist. He had a presence that just oozed authority and added a touch of dignity to every role he played. He was on the board of directors of the Screen Actors Guild for 18 years and also represented the Actors Branch in the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Board of Governors. Fans of TV's The Time Tunnel will remember him as General Hayward Kirk, the Army representative in the lab. He died on March 5, 1996 in Woodland Hills, California, a victim of Parkinson's disease. Jack Randolph Webb was born on April 2, 1920 in Santa Monica, California. His father deserted the family when Webb was a baby, and he was raised by his mother and maternal grandmother in abject poverty during the Depression. He loved movies and dreamed of making them, starting his career as a disc jockey and the host of a comedy show, before finally moving into films and scoring his first major role in tonight's movie. After making this film, he created his most famous show, Dragnet, which I'll talk about in a minute. Although he suffered from acute asthma, he smoked incessantly. At his peak, he went through 3 packs of unfiltered cigarettes a day. Although he rarely shows it on screen, he had a great sense of humor and enjoyed poking fun at his straight-faced acting persona. He appeared in 24 movies and countless TV shows as an actor or narrator, in addition to writing, producing, and directing in both mediums. He died of a heart attack on December 23, 1982 in West Hollywood, California. He Walked by Night isn't a bad movie. It's completely fictionalized in many ways, but it has enough realism in it to make up for this. In fact, the technical advisor on this movie, Sergeant Marty Wynn of the LA Police Department, fell into a conversation with Jack Webb suggesting that Webb create a show based on actual police files. Webb agreed, and the result was Dragnet. I'm sure our younger viewers, if indeed we have any, have no idea what Dragnet was all about. It's kind of hard to describe, but I'll do my best. Dragnet was about the everyday business of being a policeman. dealing with witnesses, dealing with suspects, dealing with victims. But it was told in a very terse rat-a-tat style that moved so fast you never got a chance to realize how dull it could be. Jack Webb was not only a writer on the show, he also directed it, produced, and starred in it as Joe Friday. He spoke in a staccato style that soon became a cliche and is parodied to this day. The most famous example probably being the Clapper Caper skit, performed by Johnny Carson and Webb himself on The Tonight Show. I have a copy of it and I'd love to show it to you, but I can't. I don't believe anyone from NBC or Carson Productions would ever see if I did, but we can't take the chance. You can download it at devilducky.com, although it might be easier to do a Google search using Clapper Caper as the search criteria. So right now, sit back, relax, and enjoy He Walked by Night, right here on Cleveland Classic Cinema.